I have lived in this city all my life. I was born on a council estate in West London. It was the very best start in life I could have had. From an early age, the city became the landscape of my imagination. I have seen London torn apart by bombs and race riots. I've been mugged. I've been drunk on its streets. I've known its celebrities, its vagrants, and its forgotten people. In 1999, I completed an unusual work of biography in which I told the life story of this, the greatest city on earth. I described London as a living, breathing being which is capable of vengeance and great violence. The day after I submitted the final manuscript, I suffered a massive heart attack. I spent many hours on a surgeon's table in a London hospital, having bypass surgery. I felt that I was being confronted with one of the oldest truths about this city. London can kill. London has burned many times. The city seems to invite fire and destruction. From the assault of Boadicea in AD 60 to the Great Fire of 1666, from the Blitz to the bombing campaigns of the IRA, fire has been one of the principal forces in its history. This is the story of a city that grows stronger every time it burns. The story of the fearless and deadly spirit of London. Fire is the war cry of the city. In the 11th century, when fire raged, the bells of the churches rang backwards to spread the alarm, as if the devil had suddenly emerged in the roaring of the flames. London has been forged in fire. That's why it's so fierce. Some parts of London are more apt to burn than others. Watling Street has always been fiery. Mysterious fires have broken out in Paternoster Square. Bread Street has been particularly incandescent. Records show that in the 8 years from 1833 to 1841 alone, there were 5,000 significant fires in the city.
Oh!
More fires spring up in London in December and fewer in April. Friday is the day of the week when most conflagrations occur. 10 o'clock at night is the most dangerous hour, when the shadow of death is cast by flame. In London folklore, a dream of fire denotes health and happiness, or marriage with the object of affections. A great conflagration of 1748 began when a servant left a candle burning in a stable in Change Alley in the heart of the city. The fire consumed more than 100 houses and killed a dozen people. But it's difficult to apportion blame in a part of the city that is prone to self-combustion. An engraving of the smoking ruins was promptly circulated by a nearby printer who was, appropriately, based in Scalding Alley. London grows stronger after each conflagration. It recreates itself silently and invisibly, like an indestructible living being. As it spreads like a dark stain over the map of England, it devours whole villages and towns that lie in its path. The city is now so vast and so ancient that it seems to harbour all the secrets of the human world. Every journey through its streets becomes a journey into the past. This is Ironmonger Lane in the heart of the City of London. It has been here for almost 2,000 years. The name Ironmonger Lane was first recorded in the 12th century, but even then it was of great antiquity. There's evidence of a Roman road here, suggesting unequalled continuity in the life of the city. Since the Great Fire of London, the ground level has risen by 3.5 feet, but the buildings are on the same ancient alignment. It is still exactly the width which allowed 2 carts to pass each other. It may strike you as odd that the traffic and people of the 21st century are still following lines laid out by the Romans and Saxons. It may be a cause of surprise, but it is also one of wonder. Once the city is seen in this light, it begins to reveal its mysteries. London was built by the Romans in AD 50. This was the perfect place for a new imperial city. At the head of an estuary, served by a tidal river and guarded by marshes to the east and the Fleet River to the west. London entered recorded history when the Roman writer Tacitus described the characteristic London fog.
The climate is objectionable, with its frequent rains and mists. Who the first inhabitants of Londinium were, whether natives or immigrants, remains obscure. One must remember we are dealing with barbarians.
Whatever their origin, Londoners have always been deemed to be of a fiery and violent nature. Some suggest that the name London derives from the Celtic word londos, meaning fierce. By the end of the 1st century, the population of London had risen to 30,000. It was one of the largest cities in the western part of the Roman Empire. There was a basilica here, larger than St. Paul's Cathedral. There was a forum and a fort. The first bridge was built across the Thames, just a few yards downstream from the present London Bridge. It has always been London's great symbolic gateway of trade and business. The Romans also built a defensive wall. It defined the square mile, which to this day is the financial centre known simply as the city. The city has pulsed with people, power and money ever since the Romans began trading here. The streets of London may not be paved with gold, but its primary concern has always been the accumulation of wealth. In Roman times, the headquarters of the high official who controlled the finances of the whole province were based here. Now it is the home of the Bank of England and the Stock Exchange. For 2,000 years, this small spot of earth has dealt in money and in power, but it's also been the object of divine wrath and terrible judgment. Like Troy and Rome, London has been visited by fire and destruction. London burned for the first time in AD 60, barely 10 years after its foundation. Boadicea, queen of the Iceni, led a revolt against Roman rule which caused panic in the streets of the city.
Women rushed in restless ecstasy among the people and with frantic screams proclaimed impending ruin. Near the mouth of the Thames, the image of the city in ruins was seen in the transparent water. The sea was purpled with blood, and at the ebb tide, the figures of human bodies were traced in the sand.
The Roman legions were overwhelmed by British tribes, and the Roman governor, Suetonius Paulinus, chose to sacrifice London in order to save the province as a whole.
Unmoved by lamentations and appeals, Suetonius gave the signal for the evacuation of Londinium. But those who stayed, because they were women or old or attached to the place, were slaughtered by the enemy, for the British did not take or sell prisoners. They were resolved to glut themselves with the blood of their enemies.
There's a continuous red layer of oxidized iron in London's earth, where Boadicea burned down the city. Red is London's colour, a sign of fire and devastation. The Roman wall was made of red sandstone. The public officials of medieval London wore red. Red is the Cockney slang for gold. In 1768, the London river workers invented the red flag as a token of radical discontent. Red is the colour of blood and violence in a bloody and violent city. After its baptism of fire, London arose from the ashes for the first time. It grew stronger and flourished.
Its governor gave private encouragement and public assistance for the erection of temples, public squares and mansions. Our national dress came into favour, and the toga was everywhere to be seen.
London eagerly adopted the ambitions and appetites of the Roman Empire. Its stalls, shops and offices were built in the Forum, which stood here on the same location as today's Leadenhall Market. Meat, fish and poultry have been traded here since the foundation of the city. Under the Romans, Londoners developed a voracious appetite for meat. That appetite has never been sated. In the 18th century, one foreign traveller remarked that Londoners were entirely carnivorous. And with the meat arrives the drink. A Roman brooch was recently found in the city with a drunken satyr engraved upon it. No better divinity of London could have been discovered. The ancient spirit of London imprints itself upon the desires and appetites of its inhabitants.
The Britons were gradually introduced to the pleasures that make vice agreeable. Arcades, baths, and sumptuous banquets. They spoke of such novelties as civilization, when really they were only another part of their enslavement.
Even the atmosphere would have been familiar to us. It was a city of traders called negotiators, like the present-day workers in the stock exchange. It was a city of immigrants with races from all over the Roman Empire calling London their home. It was noisy and crowded and polluted. It was dangerous at night. London's character was firmly established in its earliest years. The great markets of Eastcheap and Cheapside were also created at this time, and many of the Roman streets, lanes and alleys have followed the same lines ever since. This ancient tangle of streets has inspired generations of London's artists and writers, including the novelist Virginia Woolf.
The City of London is the passion of my life. London perpetually attracts, stimulates, gives me a play and a story and a poem without any trouble, save that of moving my legs through the streets. Have you that feeling? For certain alleys and little courts between Chancery Lane and the city. Why do I dramatize London perpetually?
Towards the end of her life, Virginia Woolf was urged to leave London. Her doctors were convinced that the excitement of the city provoked her mental turmoil and her attempts at suicide. Like so many before and since, London was threatening to kill her. This is Guildhall. It has been the City of London's centre of power for at least 500 years. It has also kept one of its oldest secrets. Beneath the 15th century crypt lies evidence that the significance of this place goes back into London's savage past. In 1988, archaeologists were astonished to discover the remains of a previously undocumented Roman amphitheatre. The London amphitheatre was built in the 1st century AD, but its original timber walls were soon replaced by stone and tile. Its wooden seats could hold about 6,000 people who watched gladiatorial combats to the death and bloody fights between bears, horses and dogs. From the beginning, Londoners acquired a taste for the Roman theatre of spectacle and violence.
I happened to drop in on the midday entertainment at the arena, in the hope of some milder diversions. But no, far from it. The combatants have nothing to protect them. Their bodies are utterly open to every blow. Every thrust finds its mark. In the morning, men are matched with lions and bears. At noon, with their spectators. Kill, flog, burn. They get drunk with the lust for blood. And the whole place seethes with savage enthusiasm.
It's somehow appropriate that such a dark and violent city should build its centre of power upon the ruins of an arena devoted to blood sports almost 2,000 years ago. The curved outline of the amphitheatre is marked out here in Guildhall Yard. The Roman imprint upon London has risen to the surface once more. This circle is one of the few signs on the surface of the city to remind us of its Roman origins. Unlike Athens or Rome, London has recklessly demolished and built over its ancient legacy in a relentless drive for expansion. Over hundreds of years, the buildings here on Lower Thames Street have been demolished, destroyed by fire and rebuilt. But the concrete foundations of this contemporary building protect a part of London's ancient past from the turmoil above. These are the remains of a Roman bathhouse, which was abandoned in the early 5th century. The glass shattered, and the roof was destroyed by wind and rain. Found among the rubble in 1868 was a Saxon brooch. It must have been dropped by an Anglo-Saxon woman, clambering over these alien Roman ruins. She was here only for a few brief moments, but her presence was recorded 15 centuries later. In London, time is like a lava flow from some unknown source of power. It may move quickly or slowly. Sometimes it hardly moves at all. Unknown source of power. It may move quickly or slowly. Sometimes it hardly moves at all. Roman London spanned a period as long as that from the late Tudors to the present day. There are few records of its early history, but legendary accounts of one or two powerful incidents survive. Occasionally, the darkness breaks and a scene presents itself. In 293 AD, a Roman general, Livius Gallus, found himself under siege by several British tribes. According to Geoffrey of Monmouth, one of the British leaders offered to spare him and his men if they would agree to surrender the city.
Gallus consented to the proposal and consequently surrendered himself and his men to Asclepiodatus, who was disposed to give them quarter. But he was prevented by a body of Venedosians who rushed upon them, and the same day ritually cut off all their heads and threw them into a brook within the city, known in Saxon as Gallowbrook.
This tale of savagery was always assumed to be one of London's brutal legends. But in the 1860s, these skulls were recovered from the bed of what is now known as the Walbrook River. The rest is silence. Ever since the Romans built the city, London has been a place of myth and superstition. In London lore, if a dog howls at night, it is a sure sign of death. Comets and eclipses have always caused excitement and discomfort. To this day, many London streets have refused to countenance a number 13, among them Park Lane, Commercial Road and the Strand. There is even a wonderful myth about London and fire. According to Celtic legend, the city was built in the image of Troy, a place which had been consumed in flames. The Trojan warrior Brutus is said to have brought a stone from its smouldering ruins on which to raise the new city.
Brutus, having thus at last set eyes upon his kingdom, formed the design of building a city, and with this view travelled through the land to find out a convenient situation, and coming to the River Thames, walked along the shore, and at last pitched upon a place very fit for this purpose. Here, therefore, he built a city which he called New Troy.
This is the stone that Brutus is said to have brought with him from Troy. It is known as London Stone. So long as the stone of Brutus is safe, runs a proverb, so long shall London flourish. Over and around it have flowed wooden carts, carriages, hansom cabs, buses, trams and cars. The magic is preserved, battered and disregarded behind a grating in an international bank. The stone once marked the very centre of the city, but in 1742 it was placed within St. Swithin's Church here on Cannon Street. Even when a German bomb entirely destroyed the church in 1941, London stone survived. It has been granted a charmed life, but it can hardly be said to have kept the city safe. The Great Fire of 1666 so imprinted itself on the history of London as to obliterate memories of every other fire. It was the defining moment in the life of the city. Samuel Pepys recorded its progress.
We went to a little alehouse on the bankside, over against the Three Cranes, and there stayed till it was dark almost and saw the fire grow. And as it grew darker, appeared more and more, and in corners and upon steeples between churches and houses, as far as we could see up the hill of the city, in a most horrid, malicious, bloody flame, not like the fine flame of an ordinary fire.
A friend of Pepys, the writer and scholar John Evelyn, walked the streets all night as the fire spread.
The conflagration was so universal and the people so astonished that from the beginning, I know not by what desponding or fate, they hardly stirred to quench it. There was nothing heard or seen but crying out and lamentation and running about like distracted creatures. Such a strange consternation there was upon them.
This was where the Great Fire started. It was one of the most terrible conflagrations in urban history, but its cause still remains mysterious. It's as if some ancient spirit of fire had reared its head in the heart of the city.
Everybody endeavouring to remove their goods, then flinging them into the river. Poor people staying in their houses as long as till the very fire touched them, then running into boats or clambering from one pair of stairs by the waterside to another.
The smoke stretched for 50 miles, so that those fleeing from the fire travelled for hours in its shadow. Those who took to the river for safety were rained upon by flying cinders and ash. That night there were fires all over the city. They spread south to the Thames and east along Cornhill and Gracechurch Street. 4 fires united into one huge flame on the corner of Threadneedle Street and Cheapside. It raged so far west that it took hold of the original St. Paul's Cathedral.
The stones of St. Paul's flew like grenades, the lead melting down the streets in a stream, the very pavements glowing with a fiery redness nor horse nor man was able to tread on them.
The citizens of London were bewildered. Many fled into the surrounding fields of Islington, Finsbury and Highgate, where they watched and wept. Like Londoners all over the city, Samuel Pepys reluctantly prepared to leave his home and possessions.
We did carry much of my goods into the garden, by moonshine, it being brave, dry and warm weather. And Mr. Hayter and I did remove my money and iron chests into my cellar, was thinking that the safest place, and got my bags of gold into my office ready to carry away. And in the evening, Sir W. Penn and I did dig a pit in the garden and put our wine in it, and I my Parmesan cheese as well.
The eastern wind was still more impetuously driving the flames forwards. Nothing but the almighty power of God was able to stop them, for vain was the help of man. Thus I left it, burning, a resemblance of Sodom or the last day, the ruins resembling a picture of Troy. London was no more.
There were many representations of those 5 days of fire. The Great Fire of London was the most arresting image of the 17th century. When London burns, its inhabitants are strangely drawn to the flames. Fire has always been conceived in theatrical terms. It is perhaps appropriate that London's theatres continually go up in flames. 37 were destroyed between 1789 and 1919. The Great Fire of London itself was recreated as a fireworks display for enthusiastic crowds in the grounds of a South London music hall in 1845. The building later fell victim to London's curse and was itself burned to the ground. When the House of Commons was destroyed by fire in 1834, Turner was inspired to paint some of his most beautiful images, as though he recognized that in the heart of the flame he might also evoke the spirit of the city itself. Virginia Woolf saw that spirit in the fiery glow of the city's lights.
There were the lights of the great theatres, the lights of the long streets, lights which indicated huge squares of domestic comfort. No darkness would ever settle upon those lamps, just as no darkness had settled on them for hundreds of years. It seemed dreadful that the town should blaze forever in the same spot, eternally burnt, eternally scarred.
London's fire would touch Virginia Woolf's own life soon enough. On the 7th of September 1940, 600 German bombers, marshalled in great waves, dropped their explosive and high incendiary devices over the city. Half a mile of the Thames shore burned. Telegraph poles began to smoke, then ignite from base to crown. In the crypt of a church in Bow, people were kneeling and crying and praying. The German bombers came back the next night and then the next. The east of London was razed to the ground. In the first 30 days, 6,000 people were killed. It was compared to the end of the world and to hell. To Londoners, it seemed to be a war against London itself.
To see London all blasted, that too raked my heart. When I see a great smash, like a crushed matchbox, where an old house stood, I wave my hand to London.
The city became misshapen and confused. The bombing was a challenge to Londoners' habitual indifference to each other. In a city where people seemed not to care about the living, did they still have the right to mourn the dead?
Who lived there? I suppose the casual young men and women I used to see from my window. The flat dwellers who used to have flower pots and sit in the balcony all now blown to bits.
The barriers of anonymity and indifference began to break down, so strangers would say good night, good luck, as they passed each other in the street.
The house about 30 yards from ours struck at 1 this morning by a bomb. Completely ruined. Scraps of cloth hanging to the bare walls, at the side still standing. A looking glass, I think, swinging. Like a tooth knocked out. A clean cut.
Virginia Woolf registers the sensation of physical shock, as if the city were a living being that could suffer hurt. By curious coincidence, London's thoroughfares of business remained relatively unscathed by the bombing of 1940. The Bank of England and the stock market seemed to have been protected by the ancient deities of the city. The destruction was largely visited upon the historical and religious areas of the city. The whole of Paternoster Row went up in flames, destroying the premises of 30 publishers and burning 5 million books in one night. 19 churches were destroyed, 16 of them built by Christopher Wren after the last Great Fire. Virginia Woolf's home in Bloomsbury was destroyed by bombing in October 1940. She wandered around the ruins of the rooms where she had written so many books. Now all turned to rubble. 6 months later, she drowned herself. Through every conflagration, the city has remained surprisingly stable. One of Winston Churchill's wartime phrases was "business as usual," and no slogan could be better adapted to the eternal condition of London. London's ability to restore itself was a source of consolation to the poet Stephen Spender.
As I walked, I had a comforting sense of the sure, dark immensity of London, like a warren containing a scattered breeding life, concealed in the ragged, dilapidated streets of Kilburn and Maida Vale. They could be destroyed at one place, but then, the wounds sealed off, would flow through other channels and streets and tunnels.
Over 300 years earlier, the city's extraordinary spirit of renewal had also been revealed to Christopher Wren, as he began work on his great masterpiece.
After the Great Fire of 1666, I was asked to build a great cathedral in place of old St. Paul's. In the beginning of the new works, an incident was noted by some people as a memorable omen. I drew a circle for the great dome and sent a workman for a flat stone from among the heaps of rubbish to mark the exact centre on the ground. He returned immediately with the fragment of an ancient gravestone, with nothing remaining of the inscription but one single word in large capitals: Resurgam, I will arise.
The promise of renewal and reconstruction is burned into London's stones. After the first night of the Blitz, the ancient spirit of the city revealed itself again. As in the Great Fire, there were unexpected discoveries and rebirths. This section of the Roman wall by Cripplegate, hidden for hundreds of years, was uncovered by the first bombs that fell on the city in August 1940. The invisible life and strength of London emerged from the devastation. The city's spirit of survival even finds expression in nature. This London plane tree grows on a piece of ground which was once a churchyard. The Church of St. Peter's was destroyed by the Great Fire and never rebuilt. This small open space in one of the most densely built-up areas of the city has been preserved ever since. During the Blitz, the buildings on both sides of Wood Street were destroyed. Yet the tree miraculously survived and became an emblem of the city itself. It has risen to a height of over 80 feet and is still thriving. In 1401, some shops were built against the old churchyard wall. They were rebuilt after the Great Fire. This row of shops has stood here ever since. The site is only a few feet in depth, and each small shop consists of a single story above and the shop front below. There have been silver sellers, wig makers, law stationers, pickle sellers, and gown makers, all of them reflecting the changing commercial life of the capital. Today, there's a sandwich bar, a newsagent, and a mobile phone shop. Such lines of continuity, some of great antiquity, are found everywhere in London. The streets and houses emerge as a matter of instinct, deriving from some ancient imperative, as if they were the cells that cluster in a human body. After the Second World War, attempts were made once again to bring order and efficiency to the structure of the city. Paternoster Square, the bombed-out area around St. Paul's, was subject to what was known as comprehensive redevelopment. The narrow lanes of Paternoster Row and Queen's Head Passage were entirely replaced by raised walkways and office blocks of concrete and glass. But after a 40-year delay, these modern structures are giving way to London's ancient will. The spirit of the city is reasserting itself. After decades of controversy, the glass and concrete have been torn down, and the line of the ancient streets is being recreated. This is Queen's Head Passage once again, leading to the new Paternoster Row. The narrow lanes of the Roman and medieval street plan have emerged again. Despite all efforts to destroy or improve this city, its ancient imperatives prevail. Its streets, lanes and passages re-emerge again and again after every assault. Everywhere in this city, the past and the present are locked in a mysterious embrace. As a Londoner, I never feel completely alone. All around us is the familiar presence of millions of human lives which have come and gone. We are part of some larger process, part of a pattern that rises up through the centuries. When I was a schoolboy, I fell under the spell of this place. I never understood why it was so soothing and so peaceful, but I was drawn to it, time after time. I know now that Fountain Court has echoed with the sound of water for at least 300 years. its softness and serenity have been experienced by many generations. London is blessed as well as cursed. Its continuity is the continuity of life itself.
The Ghost of London Past is coming to colourful life on your screens once again next on UK TV History. We join erudite author Peter Ackroyd right here in just a few short minutes.